Hello and welcome to another standard video here on the official MTG Arena channel. Today we are revisiting the green-white +1/+1 counter archetype, which got a couple new upgrades through BLOOMBURROW. The main one, Innkeeper's talent, a 2-mana class enchantment, says at the beginning of combat on our turn we can put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature we control. That's already an effect that's present in the deck, but 2 mana on an enchantment is a very competitive price for it. Then we can level it up for an additional green mana, and now permanents we control with counters on them have a ward 1, so that's a bit of protection against spot removal, always welcome. But the truly exciting part is at level 3 we now get to double the number of counters we place on our permanents. That can be a great way to combo kill the opponent with a planeswalker like Vraska Betrayal's Sting, which can come down with double the loyalty, and then immediately ultimate to apply double the poison to apply 18 to the opponent to win the game. That's a deck you've probably come across already. That's not what we're trying to do here. This is just a fair green-white +1 counter beatdown deck, but Innkeeper's talent is still one of our better cards. And then another payoff for a +1 counter deck is Ozolith, which will give us an additional +1 counter whenever we place one, and can also pay 1 and a green and tap it to put a +1 counter on a creature we control, which will basically be 2 +1 counters. Since it's legendary, we can only have one in play at the same time, but can also be cycled if we happen to draw multiples. And then another great payoff for the counter archetype is a Botanical Brawler, which is a 0/0, although it enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And very important that it has a trample, so it can attack past any chum blockers. And then whenever 1 or more +1 counters are put on another permanent we control, if it's the first time counters have been placed on that permanent, we can put a +1/+1 counter on Botanical Brawler. So that basically means we want to target creatures other than Botanical Brawler with our +1 counter effect, and then the Brawler will passively pick up +1 counters over time. And then we're also playing 4 copies of the Ornery Tumblewag, a 2/2 that once again at the beginning of combat on our turn can give us a +1/+1 counter on a creature, so similar to Innkeeper's talent. Then we can also saddle the Tumblewag, similar to how you crew vehicles, although you can only do it at sorcery speed, and we need to tap at least 2 power worth of creatures to saddle the Tumblewag. And then now when it attacks we can double the number of +1/+1 counters on a target creature, so this can get out of hand, especially if we have a level 3 Innkeeper's talent in play, or maybe if we have a Botanical Brawler which automatically enters with 2 counters and can easily end up with quite a few of them, so that can be a great combo to close out the game. And then rounding out the deck, we also have the Dusk Legion Duelist, which doesn't have any +1 counters to start out, but is a great recipient for +1 counters, as we now get to draw a card once each turn, also has Vigilance, so it can attack and block nicely. We've got a Bristly Bill giving us additional +1 counters with a Landfall. Can also maybe pay 5 mana to double the number of +1 counters on each creature we control. Can be a nice mana sink, and could potentially be a reason to include Fabled Passage in the mana base, but I went without it since we do have lots of 1-drops, so we can't afford to have too many tap lands. And then a Collector's Cage can be another way to put a +1 counter on a creature each turn, paying 1 mana as opposed to 2 mana on Ozolith, so it's a bit cheaper, and we can also activate this at instant speed as opposed to Ozolith only at sorcery speed. And when we first play Collector's Cage we get to hide away 5, so look at the top 5 cards of our library, exiling one of them face down in secrecy, and then if we have 3 or more creatures with different powers after activating Collector's Cage, we get to cast that hideaway card for free, so that can also maybe find a card like Tumblewag or some of our other 2-drops and get those in play for free. And then it's usually not too difficult to enable Collector's Cage, since our deck is basically all creatures, and we even have some 0-powered creatures, which will also contribute towards enabling it. And those include the Enduring Bondwarden, an 0/1 with backup 1, so when it enters we can put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature, including the Bondwarden itself if we want to, and it also has the ability that if this creature dies, put its counters on a target creature you control, so that can also be useful if our creature is about to maybe trade for an opposing creature. We still maybe get to move the counters elsewhere. And then we also have the new Sunshower Druid. Doesn't have that backup ability to move +1 counters around, but does come with an additional point of toughness and also gains 1 life in addition to giving us that +1/+1 counter. So these are all great to potentially play after we get something like Ozolith down, so we can immediately double the counters. Also great to play Duelist alongside one of those 1-drops to immediately draw a card, and that means that we often want to play a Rune Lurker Bat on turn 1 if possible, since that's another great recipient for +1 counters. counters, and as it has built-in evasion and lifelink, it's a great way to outrace all the aggro decks in the format. So I was really looking for a lifelinking creature we could deploy early, and having flying is just a nice bonus on top of that. So this can often be a way to maybe go all in against decks that don't have a way to remove it, as we can just try to outrace the opponent in the air while we load additional +1 counters onto our lifelinking flyer. And then the mana base has 4 copies of Razorverge Thicket and Brushland as dual lands that are untapped in the early turns, which is important, and then 8 of each basic. We've got a relatively low curve, but we still have lots of mana sinks between Ozolith, Innkeeper's Talent, Collector's Cage, and even Bristly Bill, so we usually don't lack ways to spend our mana. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the play. This without white mana is not gonna work. And this we can try. And we'll say goodbye to 1 Tumblewag. For now, play Sunshower Druid. Even though sometimes it's worth it to hold these 1-drops until after we play Brawler to get more counters out of it. Nightmare makes me discard. That's rough. Maybe get rid of the Tumblewag, since at least Cage I can cast with 2 lands. And then still play Brawler first. And then with a land I could go Cage Activate or just Cage Bondwarden if we have double white. And Bant's gonna have a look. And Bondwarden could put counter on itself. Although now Ozolith might be the better play. Yeah, mulliganing and facing 2 discard spells is pretty rough. It's gonna be a Bandit's Talent to make me discard my last card. And then Ozolith can only be activated as a sorcery. But yeah, I'll empty my hand so we have 3 lands for the future. And we are getting in for a healthy amount at least. So if they don't have removal, they might get run over. Opponent sacking the Nightmare, so they're getting pretty desperate. Maybe they have a Shieldred they wanna try and get in play, but missing the land for it. Ooh, nice. Innkeeper's Talent is perfect. Can play it level up, so now my creatures will have Ward. And that's good enough. Get to put 2 +1 counters on Sunshower Druid, 2 more on my Brawler, so that's exactly 11 damage. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw. Don't mind keeping this. Can maybe load some counters onto our Ruin Lurker Bat. Opponent black, a green. And then saving our +1 counter creatures until after we play the Brawler also makes sense. A Vinery Mentor, so this is kind of a sacrifice deck, if you will. Ozolith also going to be quite good, so wouldn't mind drawing a 3rd lane so we can play a 2-drop plus a 1-mana +1 counter creature. Opponent got the better try of discarding a Vaultborn Tyrant, so maybe there's a reanimation angle too here. Did find the land. So for now, still leaning Brawler to get that going into... Can make it Sunshower Druid. Put counter on a Ruin Lurker Bats. Growing the Brawler in the process. And a Vat of Rebirth, so yeah, opponent is trying to reanimate stuff. And yeah, with all the food tokens and treasures, they'll be able to get 4 oil counters on the Rebirth in no time. So don't really want to trade for their creatures if I can help it. But yeah, with a Bat we can try and outrace them in the air. So, can go for the Bondwarden. And then it's still probably worth it to attack, even though, what does that mean? Opponent can double block, get 2 oil counters, have a treasure, and a food token. So if they sack the treasure, they go up to 3 oil counters. So with a land, they would be able to reanimate the Voltborn next turn. So maybe I just don't give them that opportunity yet. And just attack for 4 in the air. Freebooter attacks can block with a druid. And our opponent's gonna cut down their own creature since they cannot take out my 4/4 or 5/5, just to trigger Freebooter and Vow of Rebirth. Although they still need to wait 1 more turn before they can reanimate anything, and then Innkeeper's Talent was a great draw too. So play Talents, maybe go for Sunshower Druid here. And then, yeah, opponent explodes. Can do some quick math here to see how it would have played out. But I've got a few options. As long as we don't target the Brawler directly with our +1 counters, it will passively pick up 2 counters with each trigger, thanks to the Ozolith. So we can put 2 counters on the bat, make it a 6/6. Maybe 2 counters on the Bond Warden, since if that dies, it can also move its counters. And then we're attacking with a 9-powered Trampling Brawler, a 6-powered Flying Bat, so that's already close to lethal, plus we get another 2-powered Bond Warden getting in there too. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We've got what looks like a Keeper. Bat into Ozolith, and then ideally find an extra green source or another counter generator, so we can unload those after playing Ozolith. Alright, so now next turn I could play double Sunshower Druid, giving me 4 +1 counters total. Although against turn 1 Swamp, we can expect some removal, so going all in on 1 creature may not be the correct play. Deep Cavern takes 1 Druid, but find another one. Could also activate Ozolith, which I don't hate, just to spend all my mana and spread out the +1 counters a bit. Although maybe for now still go all in on the bats. And next turn I can start growing the Sunshower Druid. Opponent Esper Colors. Although Raffine rotated out of Standard, so don't need to fear that card anymore. And Lunar Convocation, so there's a bat deck. Not sure what the blue is for. Opponent does get to make a token since they lost life off Underground River, and a Duelist is a great pickup. So, what's my sequencing? Play Duelist, and then play Sunshower Druid. Although if our opponent's got a cut down left in hand, they could take out Duelist in response. But yeah, it's a close call. Can also just activate Ozolith, I suppose, since otherwise I'm not using that mana. And send in for 5. Although, yeah, it's gonna be tricky with all the extra tokens our opponent can generate. They can eventually just chum block my Rune Lurker. So I could also hang back to try and block, so they don't get to gain life for free. Close call. If they have removal, I may regret not attacking first. In case of the Uneaten Feast can be another way for them to gain life. So yeah, making a 1/1 token each turn is going to be a nuisance. And another Deep Cavern can take another Druid. At least we have 2 creatures that can profitably attack. And Duelist draws us additional cards as well. Find another bat. So now I can probably afford to attack with the 5/5. Yeah, this is where Botanical Brawler with Trample is going to come in handy. Could have sequenced my mana a little bit differently to keep more whites available, since we do have lots of white 1-drops between Bat and the Bond Warden that I could have drawn into with the Duelist. Now Amalia can pick up additional +1 counters as well. And another Convocation, yeah, that starts getting out of hand now. 2 bats per turn, gaining life, growing Amalia. That's just too many chum blockers for us to get past unless we find Trample. And there it is. Right on time. Although, can we keep up with Amalia is the question. That may not be all that straightforward. So next up, I can maybe still grow the other Ruin Lurker bats, or I can keep growing Duelist to draw more cards. And Tumblewag's not bad either. There's a third Convocation coming up. So yeah, they've got a perfect setup for it. The Pain Land also doing a lot of work, although they can also activate to draw a card at the cost of 2 life. And now a Starscape Cleric is gonna actually close out the game for them. And yeah, with triple Convocation making tokens each turn, it's not gonna take long for the opponent to take over. So, not loving my chances here. Zorlin on top, so that can also drain us to death soon. For now, we can play Tumblewag. And then activate Ozolith, maybe on the other Ruin Lurker bat. Innkeeper's Talent is not bad. So, let's get in with everyone. Opponent triple blocks Ruin Lurker. Ends up jumping instead. So we've got a lot of hopes riding on Botanical Brawler. With Tumblewag, next turn we could double its +1 counters. So that's the hope. Our opponent can still draw with the Lunar Convocation. If they lose some of their creatures, Zorlin can also get them back, or they can sack the case once it's solved. And now a Pylon coming up. Our opponent can actually draw Pylon with a Convocation and then still cast it with Convoke, so that can actually disrupt our Tumblewag turn. Let's see if they realize. Can they draw at any point? They can. So our opponent can cast a Pylon for free, basically. So I think that means we don't have a chance anymore. Unless we can play Talent and level it up, then we'll have Ward. That's maybe one sneaky way to protect our combo here. Alright, so I guess they can still take out the Tumblewag. The goal is still to activate Ozolith. And then I could target the Sunshower Druid to saddle the Tumblewag. And let's see if they let me attack here. Go to attackers, get 2 +1 counters, and then we just want to target our Ruin Lurkers, I guess. Attack, and then Tumblewag gets to double the Brawler's +1 counters, make it a 30-30. Opponent draws, but yeah, now we have Ward 1, so they can no longer pile on the Brawler. So we might have kind of stolen it here. If they did this in response, our opponent probably wins the game pretty easily, but there we have it, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a keepable hand, I would say. A Rune Lurker into Duelist, and then Sunshower can maybe draw a card. Well, let's see what we're up against. Turn 1 Mountain. And a Frontliner, so borrows tokens most likely. So having a big flying Rune Lurker could be a way to maybe beat them while they kind of gum up the ground with a bunch of tokens. But initially drawing a card with Duelist still seems worth it. Our opponent does have the turn 2 Demolition, although only 4 creatures so they can Convoke. And Osolith was a great draw. Now our opponent does have 4 creatures in play, so next turn they could play the Case and already take out my Rune Lurker banked. So that could be painful. But yeah, let's start with Sunshower Druids, Row Duelists, make it a 4/4, draw card. Still dies to Case of the Gateway Express, but we have another one in hand. And Gateway Express would also pump their team, so that's probably the main card we want to avoid next turn. Opponent's got a Parlor. And our opponent passes a turn, so they must have reinforcements in hand then. Okay, so with that information, can play Bondwarden, Bat, and activate Osolith, but maybe start with Bondwarden, more counters on the Duelist to draw, since it only triggers once each turn. And if we draw Tumblewag, for instance, I might prefer playing that. Innkeeper's Talent's also a good one. So, can play that instead of activating Osolith and still play a Bat. I think that's better than going for the Ward 1, which is also an option. So there's the reinforcements, as we suspected. Opponent already forced to chum block. And yeah, next turn we can keep loading more counters onto our flyers. With a land I could even level up twice to double the number of +1 counters. But we'll see. And then the random life gain is also quite valuable when our opponent's maybe setting up a recruiter. War Leader's Call is acceptable. So a functional draw from the Burrows deck. Maybe not their best draw. We didn't see a Knight Errant yet. They didn't have the Case of the Gateway Express initially. And we can block. Maybe soak up 3 damage and could just take 8, since they might present bigger attackers next turn. Alright, and then I think we're just going for Sunshower Druid, activate Osolith. And then we could play another Duelist, put a counter there to draw, but we can also just close out the game. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a decent hand. A Rune Lurker into Innkeeper's Talent, and then got more +1 counters coming up. Our best draws include the Botanical Brawler, the Tumblewag, and then Osolith would also be great, as we've got a lot of +1 counter sources here. Opponent on a mouse deck, so it's going to be a race. So having a big lifelinker is going to be quite useful. So I might just go all in on the bat next turn with more +1 counters. All the opponents got the ideal start of Heartfire Hero into Manifold Mouse to give double strike, hit me for 4. So that also hurts. Alright, so for now, I'll level up the talents. And just go all out on the Rune Lurker, I want to say. Sometimes it's worth it to load some counters onto the Bond Warden, because when it dies, it can move its +1 counters around. But we don't have a counter doubling effect on the battlefield yet, so next turn I will be able to level up talent once again, get 2 +1 counters, make this a 7/7, and the mouse deck is not known for its removal, so if it's just a pure race, we might be able to get them in the air. And that's exactly why Rune Lurker Bat made the cut in this deck. I was looking for a cheap lifelinker, and then flying has a nice evasive ability as the cherry on top. And then we do have some random creatures that can chum block here, so that's why they went with Trample instead of Double Strike. Can still block with our Sunshard Druid. And just level up the talent. Good mana sink. Get in for 7. Back up to 28. And I don't see the mouse deck dealing 28 damage. And our opponent explodes. Awesome. And we get to rank up here as well. So yeah, a successful set of games with our green-white +1 counters. The Innkeeper's talent has seen a lot of play recently alongside Planeswalkers that you can ultimate if you've got a level 3 Innkeeper's talent on the battlefield. Thinking of Vraska especially, which can immediately apply 18 poison counters to the opponent. That's a very flashy and powerful deck, but turns out that just playing it in a regular +1 counter aggro deck is also very effective. So that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.